and get started here. So as a reminder of where we left off last week, looking at the Old Testament, Genesis 3, we are more than halfway through the chapter, but not all the way done with it yet. And we'd finished on the curses. We hadn't gotten to man's curse. So again, verse 15, you have the Lord cursing the devil. Verse 16, God curses woman. God 17, God curses man. And so we'd finished with 16, but I had mentioned I wanted to look at the parallel with chapter 4, and I hadn't had a chance. So I did that. I went back and I looked at the parallel between the two chapters to see how well English translations handle this parallel, which if, again, you don't know Hebrew, you're not looking for it, right? English translations would have to help, and even at that, they're probably going to have to give you a footnote or some kind of a link to connect the two verses together for you as an English reader to see it. But I've got it up here, the Hebrew of both Genesis 3:16 and then Genesis 4:7. So 3:16 again is God's curse of woman. And then in chapter 4, verse 7, this is when Cain has killed his brother Abel. And at that point then, you have the idea that sin is crouching at the door and has a desire to overcome Cain, but he must rule over it. Right? That's the English parallel that we're looking for. And so I put the Hebrew up here and highlighted the letters that are identical in between those two. The word for desire in Hebrew here is teshuka. It only shows up in Genesis 3, 4, and then once in the Song of Solomon. So not a common word in the Old Testament whatsoever. And this is one where I don't know how translation philosophy or how the teams did their translation work. Like, did 3 people translate the same chapter and then sat down together and reviewed it and made their changes and made the text the same? Did one person translate one chunk and somebody else worked on another part? I don't know how they did the work, but if you're translating through Genesis 3 on Monday afternoon and you come back and you do Genesis 4 on Tuesday afternoon, you can't miss this. You'd recognize, I've seen that Hebrew word recently, and you'd go back and you would see the same exact structure, which I point out at the bottom, right, the parallel. The phrasing is, and to, and then whatever it is that is craved, the craving, and then whatever was being craved is going to rule the one that craved it, right? The exact same sentence structure between the two verses. So I went through and I looked at the English versions and how they did with this. Desire and rule were the most commonly linked word pairs. So I underlined English translations that got this right. I went back and gave them an extra point. Jim, could you turn the master volume down just a little bit? That would be helpful. Thank you. Maybe the speakers won't be so squeaky. We turned the volume up last night for the movie. So NIV, ESV, the Berean Literal, and King James all got this well. New King James and the Legacy Standard, Christian Standard, Holman Standard, American Standard, so you see several. You can't really see that I highlighted CEV down here. Look what they did between the two. So Genesis 3:16, you will still desire your husband, he will rule over you. Chapter 4, verse 7, sin wants to destroy you, don't let it. Right? These are the same Hebrew sentences in between the two spots. Can you imagine taking 4 for CEV back into 3? How would that read? You want to destroy your husband, he won't let you? Right? Like, they wouldn't translate chapter 3 that way. So anyway, strange. ERV, ISV do well with this. WBT, WEB, LSV, a couple of these as well. So several translations actually do bring this parallel forward for us to see, which is helpful. It's good. But again, I think as an English reader, if they don't put some kind of a little notation somehow, we probably will miss it. But if they at least have the parallel there and you're reading straight through, your mind might remember, I just read desire rule, and you can make the connection. All right, questions on anything in the beginning part of the Genesis 3 text before we move on and look at the curse of man? Okay, so again, literal translation here. To Adam he said, because you listened to the voice of your wife, you ate from the tree which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat from it. Cursed is the ground on account of you. In pain you will eat it all the days of your life. We've seen this in the text before. The word fruit will get added in a lot of these verses that wasn't in the original. So NIV does that. Look at NLT talking about the curse of the ground. All your life you will struggle to scratch a living from it. A little different than you will eat of it all the days of your life. I did give a bonus point to translations here on this verse that parallel verse 16 well. I mentioned that before, that both of the curse of woman, the curse of man, they're both threes. There are three things in each list. And the first thing on both lists is pain. And that's the same Hebrew word pain in both lists. So where they bring that across in English, I gave them a bonus for that. The old King James language didn't use pain, it used sorrow. But it used sorrow in both places, so the parallel again brought forward for you to be able to see it is helpful for us. LSB did that well on this next slide as well. The Amplified Version, at the beginning of the verse, stuck the divine name in there, even though it's not in the text. And as they do often, they take a single word. So in sorrow, they have in sorrow here, and then they add an extra phrase. They do that a lot. So in sorrow and toil instead of just in sorrow. Contemporary English down at the bottom. They add Yahweh to the beginning of the verse. They add fruit. Same things we see elsewhere. Struggle to grow enough food is accurate probably in terms of meaning, but certainly different than the text reads in Hebrew. GW adds fruit a couple of times. They omit the reason, right? The beginning of the verse, because you listened, right? There's a reason for the curse for man, and it's omitted from a couple of these, like G&T omits it as well. ISV takes all the days and replaces it with rest, the rest of your life. WBT, LSV both pick up well on that, again, that parallel with verse 16, using that word sorrow. Verb tense, look at SLT. To Adam he said, because thou didst listen to the voice of thy wife, thou wilt eat from the tree which I commanded. The problem is he already ate from the tree, not that he's about to. So not good, not helpful. NAB at the bottom there, bringing toil across for both. Brenton Septuagint does it well. And then on the last one for verse 17, weary, right? Weary from work you will eat. That's a phrase not included in others as well. Questions on 17? Those are, again, the three curse verses, 15 through 17. All right, verse 18, a little shorter, simpler verse. Thorns and thistles it will cause to grow for you. You will eat the green plants of the field. A couple of translations will take green plants, which, that's the literal Hebrew word is green plants, and replace it with grain. Vegetation probably works. Grain is a little specific as it narrows down what man will eat to one or a couple of things. So maybe not the best use of word there. But otherwise you'll see a lot of consistency in verse 18 across the translations. Contemporary English, for whatever reason, there's basically two clauses here, and they just decided to flip-flop them and put them in a different order. I don't think I docked a point for that. This was last week's study, so I don't think I did, but a couple of the translations go with wild. We've had the same conversation around animals. Wild really does not fit this particular verse either. That makes it sound like they're not even eating the fruit that they have grown themselves, right? They're eating wild. They're eating like whatever they can forage is the way that ends up reading. LSV, again, verb tensing all the way through LSV has been not helpful, so that happened again. A couple of the translations end up using the word earth. I didn't take points away for that because the Septuagint does that, I believe. And then if you're looking at the Peshitta, it says they will eat the grass of the field. So the only one I can recall in Scripture doing that is who? You remember? King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. So I guess that comes true for him, but not normal for most people. Toby? Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit picky, right? But still clearer words in English to communicate the idea of the text, whether herbs or vegetation or plants, those kinds of things. EHV even with crops. Verse 19, by means of the sweat of your face you will eat bread until you return to the ground, because from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. NLT says you were made from dust, instead of simply you are dust. So a different verb. CEV, you will eat sweat all your life to earn a living. Instead of eating the bread, you're earning a living, so a bit difference, bit of a distinction. G&T, you will have to work hard and sweat to make the soil produce anything. ISV, you were buried in the ground. So just, again, some differences there, but Peshitta was the only one that capitalized the word earth in that verse. Not something I took anything off for, but just an observation. Verse 20, the man called the name of his wife Heva, for she herself would become mother of all the living. And somebody asked about this last week already, so I already talked about this, but a few of you I know are here this morning that weren't then. So briefly, Adam named his wife the Hebrew word for life because she would become the mother of all the living, right? So there's this intentional wordplay Adam makes use of as he names her. And then when that got translated into Greek, then the Septuagint, 200 BC-ish, and they kept that word pair. So the Greek word for life is zoe, and then the word for living is zonton. So that's clearly in the Septuagint. But when Jerome in the 4th century translates everything into Latin, he loses the wordplay. He takes the Latin word for living, which is viventium, and he puts that at the end of the verse. But he brings basically Heva forward into Latin instead of using maybe like Vivian or something like that to make the parallel last. So we've done that in English as well. We've not kept Adam's wordplay that he was using here. So something to bear in mind. I don't know that we'll have English translations really make use of that, but NLT doubles the man, right? Adam means man anyway, so they stick it in there twice, which is a little odd. AMP, the Amplified, helps to try and see, to bring it across. So does the Berean Annotated, right? By telling you life spring, living, life giver, all those different little phrases and parentheses. GW did that as well. G&T got more specific than every living thing, right? And went with all human beings. So that's a little different than the Hebrew text has written, but it is certainly the intention of the passage. LSV again went weird in verbs, right? The man calls his wife's name Eve, for she has been mother of all the living. Like there aren't any living ones at the moment that she's birthed yet, so it's just, what's going to be weird is when we get to the New Testament, LSV is like third to last in the Old, they're first in the New. I don't understand how they did such drastically different translations of the two Testaments. But anyway, that'll be later this morning. We'll see more of that. SLT did it, right? Adam will call his wife's name life. They have the verb's weird again. Will call, no, he's already done it, right? And she was the mother. So they messed up that part, but they put life in there. And then the Peshitta really tried, right? He called the name of his wife Hawa because she was mother of everyone who lives. And the Septuagint version, Brenton did it. He called the name of his wife Life because she was mother of all the living. So only a couple of English translations make use of that. But for the most part, they read simply, right? EHV, the man named his wife Eve because she would be the mother of all the living. Very simple English translation that we're used to. 21, we've already talked about the word play, the word pairing or contrast with verse 7. So Adam and Eve, realizing they had sinned, they realized they were naked, made out of fig leaves loincloths for themselves, or girdles, or some kind of small word, whereas the verse 21 is a larger word of what God gives to them. So Yahweh God made for Adam and for his wife long shirt-like garments of skin, and he clothed them. So the underlined ones are where they got a bonus point for that stark enough contrast that you can see it's not the same word. So tunics, coats. ESV got garments because I think it actually did use something like loincloth before. Just something that makes the contrast noticeable. ASV continues to use Jehovah. A contemporary English doesn't even include clothing them, right? God makes the clothing, but it's not on them yet. Like it's just that verb is missing, which is relevant because this is a type of Christ, right? That he sacrificed himself. He is then what we are clothed in. We are clothed in his robe of righteousness. So if God doesn't actually put it on them, then that's a missing element for that parallel for the New Testament. GW, I scratched out the word clothes. It's the only translation, I think, if I remember right, that used the exact same word between verse 7 and verse 21, showing you no contrast whatsoever. ISV got a little fancy. The Yahweh God fashioned garments for them. Nothing docked for that, but just, again, noticing a difference in the text. NAHB, as they normally do, omits the divine name, unfortunately. LSV messes up verbs again. Jehovah showing up in YLT and SLT. Not a lot new there. A lot of similarity. Okay, verse 22, Yahweh God said, "Behold, the man became like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now, lest he stretch out his hand and take also from the tree of life of the living, and eat and live forever." NAV doesn't have the behold word, so behold, see, look, something like that opens the sentence, God calling the Trinity to attention here. That's missing. Must not be allowed is not the structure of the Hebrew there. NLT goes with human beings instead of man. Trying to remember if this is a singular or plural. I think it's singular, as most texts read the man, right? One, not multiple. Amplified, I gave them a bonus point for their interpretation at the end of the verse, right? The Lord said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Now he might stretch out his hand, take from the tree of life as well, and eat and live forever." The problem isn't man living forever. The Lord wants man to live forever. The problem would be man living in sin and in brokenness forever. So I appreciated that they brought that across, again, in their bracketed style to show that it's not actually in the text, but just them trying to teach. Again, they do that well sometimes and not so well other times. Look at contemporary down at the bottom. They omit the tree of life from the verse. It's just missing altogether. GW, GNT drop behold, so does NET. ISV tried to put a timestamp on it. Later, Yahweh God said, which is the time passing that the other translations don't show, nor does the verse itself. NAHB, let us send him out, added to the text. See anything additional to comment on there. AAT, but now I don't want him to reach. Definitely a different phrase than the Lord used when the Lord himself spoke. I'm always squeamish about that. Even with singing one of the hymns this morning in church, I was still squeamish about it because there's a giant block of quoted text as though Jesus said it when it's not actually the words Jesus said. He meant, like, all of that is certainly it's good teaching. It's just saying he said it when he didn't say it. It always makes me squeamish. Verse 23, Yahweh God sent him out from the Garden of Eden to work the ground which he was taken from there. A lot of English translations will go stronger on the verb sent out, right? But it's the literal Hebrew word for to send out. So banished, you'll see that often. NLT banished them instead of banished him. It's, again, Hebrew singular. It's just referring to Adam, although we know contextually them is accurate, right? Adam and Eve both banished, not just one of them. Amplified added an extra verb, right, to till and cultivate. A couple of expelleds. NET keeps using the word orchard. Same things we saw a lot last week. Oh, look at NHEB here. This is the one where all the way through the text, wherever the divine name has appeared, they've left it out entirely. They just don't use the divine name, except for here. It's snuck through. I don't know if it does it a few other times in the Old Testament for them, but I was kind of happy. I cheered a little bit when it made it in there. SLT, God will send. Again, the verb tensing, not helpful. Then verse 24, end of the chapter, he drove the man out, and he caused to dwell from the east to the garden, or in front of the Garden of Eden, the cherubim and the flaming sword, turning every way to guard the way of the tree of the living. It's always fascinated me about verse 24 that the angels are not described as holding this sword. And the angels are plural, and the sword is only singular. So it's like you've got these angels standing guard, and then there's just this fiery sword that's doing its own thing. Most translations bring that across, but there's a couple that'll lose that. NLT adds in the name Yahweh again when it wasn't actually in the text. They describe the cherubim. They give them an extra adjective, mighty. Amplified does what Amplified does, protect and guard instead of just guard. But the east of the Garden of Eden, he permanently stationed. I'm not sure I like the word permanently there. I don't know that the Garden of Eden's still there. It could be, and the Lord has just prevented us from seeing it, kind of like Balaam's donkey situation thing. Or the Lord has removed it entirely at this point from creation. I don't know for sure, but Amplified takes an uncertain stance, certainly. And then CEV translates cherubim as winged creatures, and the tree of life as the life-giving tree. So a couple of unusual phrasings. Cherubims made into angels in GW instead of a specific type of angel, just more general. There's no driving out in GNT. NET called them angelic sentries, but then notice who used the flaming sword. So it put the sword into the hand of, I guess, one of the angels, although it reads plurally, I don't know. LSV, he casts out the man, causes, so again, tense. He will drive out Adam. CPDV, the Catholic Public Domain, he placed the cherubim with a flaming sword turning together. I'm not sure what that would look like, both the angel and the sword turning, but Yahweh's added in there, and LB, the Lamza Bible. Peshitta went with the point of a sword instead of flaming. Similar words, but not quite the same in Hebrew. AAT put the sword in the hand of the cherubim as well. Actually pluralized it too. I missed that it made it plural. All right, so that's our Genesis 3 review. We had this list up at the end of class last week so you could see it. The strongest Genesis 3 text was actually ESV, the text that we use as a congregation. I did not give them any favoritism in scoring, but that was nice to see them rise to the top. And then BLB, King James, Legacy Standard. King James, WBT, ERV, those would be kind of the older style English texts that are at the top of the list. How many of you like older style English Bibles? 1, 2, 3. Okay. How many of you like the old language English Bibles, like King James? Sometimes, right? And part of this, too, is the idea that we can have, hopefully, the option of having a couple of English translations we like, including maybe one of the old ones, and have them side by side on the shelf in our room, of our home, wherever we like to study God's Word, so that we can see multiple translations that are helping us understand the text even better. But at the bottom of the list, since contemporary English came in last, if they just admitted they were a paraphrase, I wouldn't have even bothered with them, but they claim to not be a paraphrase, so they're on the list. I looked into it. They actually do claim they are not a paraphrase of the text. So then the Good News Translation, Smith's Literal, the Literal Standard, rounding out the other bottom texts there. All right, so New Testament example. I pondered Romans 9, I pondered Ephesians 2, but I ended up going with 1 Peter 3. It was also one of the ones I was considering from the beginning. And the reason I ended up choosing it was because it's a bit of everything. Like, Ephesians 2 is a great New Testament chapter that gives you the gospel story, like, in one chapter. It's fantastic. 1 Peter 3 is going to deal with the male-female stuff, which is what a lot of the English translations seem to be struggling with the most. It's also going to deal with Jesus' descent into hell. It's going to deal with the sacrament of baptism. So it's just like, it's got enough of a little bit of everything in it. Maybe we go this route. So that's one I chose. There's a few of the translations that drop out of consideration because they ended up being Old Testament only. The Peshitta Bible, the JPS is the Jewish one, and then Brenton is the Greek Septuagint. Makes sense for the Septuagint not to be translated in this way, but there are a few on Bible Hub. If you look at a New Testament passage, they'll have a whole section of New Testament only translations. Rather than studying all those and recommending you a New Testament only Bible, I think it's important to keep the Old Testament too, so I didn't bother. But you can see some of their names up there. There is the Aramaic Bible in plain English is a New Testament only, but it's meant to parallel with the Peshitta, the PHBT. They both come from that idea that the Bible was originally written in Aramaic and translated into all these other languages. I'm not sure we agree with that concept, but because it seems to be a family tree there, I went ahead and included that one in this study. All right, so we got 20 minutes to get started on this one. Verse 1, likewise, wives, be subordinate to one's own husbands, in order that even if any disbelieve in the word, through the way of life of the wives, without a word they will be gained. So, the word pair here can be wife, husband. It could also just generically be woman, man, because those words in Greek do either. The word for wife is gune, also woman. The word for man, aner, or husband. Those words do show up in English language, right? If you think of the misandry or misogyny phrases, hatred of man, hatred of woman, those are the Greek words here. Miseos, to hate in Greek. So that's a Greek compound word. The English language in the 21st century is seemingly liked to use a lot. I struggle with the language, right? Through the way of the life, without a word, they will be gained. You'll see some will be, you'll see some may be language. Probably both of them can be accurate to the Greek verb. But it's just like, is this a possibility that if your husband is not believing and you live faithfully around him, he'll come around? Or is this it's a maybe, right? Like, contextually, we would know it's a maybe, but there are faithful translations that are still going with the will be, which is the simple meaning of that verb tense. So anyway, that was a struggle I wrestled with a little bit as I did the work translating that one. NLT, instead of using a word like submit or subject, said, you wives must accept the authority of your husbands. So certainly a just a different sounding phrase there. One of the things picked up on this verse, and a couple of times also in the verses to follow, is the verb for women in the verse, right? In the original text, it's passive, be subordinate or be subject. Most English translations make it active, submit yourself, or accept their authority, right? It's a subtle distinction, but it's a distinction nonetheless, being passive versus being active. This might be a cultural thing, that in those cultures at that time, like this is just the way things were, so stay in that pattern. Whereas now in America, they're not in that pattern, and so maybe the English translations feel like you have to put yourself into I don't know. But that comes out a lot in, again, really the first 7 verses. There's a few spots where this will show up again and again. HCSB, instead of way of life or conduct, instead of word, it has Christian message, so there's a bit of a difference. CEV, Contemporary English, makes it conditional. It uses the word if here instead of other translations that don't, because it's not in the Greek. And instead of submit, it's put your husband first, a little bit different again. I would say, again, put your husband first, and the same for husbands, put your wife first. Like that is marriage language. That's not wrong language. It's just not exactly what the text is communicating here. If he opposes our message was an interesting way of phrasing if they disbelieve the word. And then they just added the final thing. No one else will have to say anything to him. That's not in the text at all. It's just like the wife can do it all herself. Don't rely on the help of your neighbors or your pastor or your family. Just nobody else. Just odd that they put that in there. Place yourselves under your husband's authority. The word authority is not in the text at all. It's just the word. G&T adds God's to that. I think it is what the text means, but it's not what the text had written, so it's an added word. WBT used the word deportment in this verse. Any of you use that word? Deportment. They use it again later in the chapter, so it shows up twice for them. Some of these words I looked up. I didn't bother to look up deportment. Some of the older English Bibles like to use the word conversation, and that's not a helpful translation, especially when you read it. So let's read YLT. I think it's Young's literal. In like manner, the wives, be ye subject to your own husbands, that even if certain are disobedient to the word, through the conversation of the wives without the word, they may be won. So by not speaking, right, like it's just a weird thing. But the word conversation is not the Greek, right? It's the way of life or conduct. Some English translations will use the word behavior. Right, it's not a conversation that it's getting at with that particular word. So I see that a couple of times here. Smith went a weird way with it by the turning back. I don't know where she got that idea from. That's not where the text is. Accept the authority. Lambda, likewise, in all capital letters. I have no idea why they capitalized that word that way, but that's how it comes across. The Aramaic Bible in plain English used the word beautiful, put an adjective in front of the way of life, probably picking up on these next couple of verses, as the word beauty is going to be made use of in a lot of English translations. AAT, similarly, you married women, submit to your husbands. I marked that green just because they're the only one that used that phrase. It's either woman or wife in all the other ones. And it was really the first time that stood out. So no point off for Beck, but it was just interesting difference. Verse 2, having observed your holy way of life in fear. Literally, the verse would read even more literally, having observed the in fear holy way of lives of you. So you can see from Greek, you've got to clean Greek up into English. That just doesn't work. And so the question always in translation work is how much do you clean it up versus how much do you let it stand? Most of our translations in English are going to veer away from using the word fear in verse 2. And we'll use revere, respect kind of language instead. Most of them are going to go away from even the word holy being an adjective. And they're going to make this a doubling kind of a thing. So it's not purity and reverence as though two things you're supposed to uphold, but your reverence is pure, right? It's an adjective modifying the noun. And a lot of the English translations avoid that for some reason altogether. And then the question of who's afraid. Is the husband living in fear because he's a pagan and he's surrounded by terror in this life? Terror on every side, as we see in the Old Testament a few times. Is the wife living in fear of her husband because of the Genesis 3 passage we just had, where he's not ruling her well, but he's ruling her terribly? Or is she living respectably before her husband, right? Like, you can see different ways to consider this depending on how you translate it. I don't have an answer for you on that one, by the way, which of those three it is, but those are all options that the Greek text allows for. And again, English cleans it up, right? The word fear is gone from a lot of the English ones altogether, but it's the Greek word phobos, which gives us the word phobia in English. Accompanied by fear, so again, a lot of the doublings. Contemporary English, this is a paraphrase, probably a helpful paraphrase. They just, again, don't claim to be. Because he will see how you honor God and live a pure life. There's nothing wrong with that statement. It conveys what we're talking about in the overall flow of the chapter. It's a paraphrase. I came to that conclusion more and more as I studied contemporary English. But anyway, behavior coupled with fear, a couple of verbs added by those next translations. A lot of similar stuff going on in these texts. Smith used the phrase turning back again instead of the way of life or conduct. NAB stuck in the word chaste, kind of flipped the order, but it's the only one that used chaste, I think, instead of holy or pure. Aramaic Bible went with discretion. Lamsa went with modesty. These are translating out of an Aramaic text that I don't have access to that I know of. So those are different words than we have in the regular Greek text. A.A.T. Beck said, fear God. God is not in the verse. So it could be a proper reference, but it's an addition. 3 and 4 are going to make interesting use of the word world. So cosmos is a word in English that we know, right, actually we end up using the word cosmos differently, don't we? Because how would you define cosmos, or the cosmos? Yeah, pointing up, right? I saw a few of you pointing up, talking about the universe. The word cosmos in Greek is world. World. And almost any place you see it in Greek in the New Testament, it will be translated in English as world or somehow related to world, except for a couple of spots, namely, notably here, from what I could tell. I didn't look up every single one of them. But I think it's because in the next, is it the next verse? Is it 4? Oh, is it 5? It's coming up. It gets used as a verb. The word world is used as a verb, kosmeo. And when it's used as a verb, it's usually described as putting something in order or arranging it. And so that's where you're going to get in verse 3 and 4, right? Whose adornment, that word adornment is not really the normal meaning for this Greek word, but it's because of the verb form coming back and just the way Peter's playing with the word. That's why you're going to see adornment all over an English text. But otherwise, if you didn't have that, it would just be whose world would not be from braided hair, right? So your world, your priorities, what you value, where you invest yourself into. Like the word world can make sense here. It's just a bit odd for us probably in English. So adornments, which you'll normally see. I'm going to point out before going further, notice how they ramp up the value. In Greek, it's just putting on gold, putting on garments. It's just the Greek word for a garment. It's nothing special in the Greek text, but you'll often see fancy or fine or elaborate. They're raising the value of the thing. And I think, that's not wrong, but it's taking away part of the basic meaning of the verse, which is don't dress for people to look at you, right? You're not supposed to be seen as a Christian because of what you're wearing, regardless of what it is. You could go the opposite direction on the same thing and talk about sackcloth and ashes like Jesus would have with the Pharisees, right? Don't do this to be seen. Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount. The point is that you would be seen for your good works, which point to Christ. That's Matthew 5, verse 16. So that gets a little lost, I think, as we try to talk about only the fine stuff. Yes, braided hair, putting on gold. It can be gold jewelry. It's just the basic word for gold in Greek, and then basic word for garments. A lot of translations use the word adorning a second time. Don't let your adorning with outward adorning. It's not really necessary, but you'll see it a lot. This slide, which is normally just a clean white slide, we breeze right by New King James and all these NASB guys. I think they changed the meaning of this verse with the word they added in. They italicized it, all of them italicized it, I guess except 95 version of NASB. So they're telling you they've added the word into the translation. But what does adding the word merely do to the text? Do not let your adornment be merely outward. That means you should care about how you adorn yourself outward, which is the opposite of what Peter's actually saying in the text. So, although these normally are good, solid translations, they all missed this one by adding that word that's not there. Amplified did it as well. You'll see the word beauty showing up in some of these. Again, it's not in the Greek text, but it's that whole picture with the verbal form of the word world kind of ends up leaning into this. So I didn't end up taking points off of beauty. I started to, but as I delved deeper, it was just becoming more and more clear with the verbal use that it was okay. So, but you'll see it a lot. Catholic Public Version added the word unnecessary in front of adornment, which is just unnecessary, I suppose. That word doesn't need to be there. I guess this is verse 4 now. This is an interesting phrase Peter gives us, but the hidden man of the heart in the imperishable. The imperishable is what we call a substantival noun. It's an adjective, but when you put the word the in front of it, so like bad, the bad, doesn't really work in English, right? The bad, we want to put something after, the bad person, the bad thing, the bad dog, whatever it is, right? It's calling for a noun at that point. So Greek does that too. So imperishable, you'll see words like quality, the imperishable quality, or the imperishable beauty, or so you'll see words added there to help bring English sense to that phrase. So that's good. But yeah, that phrase, the hidden man of the heart, is just unusual, probably, especially since we're talking of women in particular, to say the hidden man of the heart instead of saying the hidden woman of the heart. But this is the word Peter used. Amplified added unfading charm, doubled up again. Berean annotated just made it your heart, right? The inner disposition of your heart. Holman Standard eliminated the word man altogether. They didn't know what to do with it, so they dropped it, which isn't the best translational tactic. But contemporary English, definitely, again, beautiful. Use the word special. God considers it very special at the end of the verse there. Special is a word that 21st century America, maybe 20th century America too, are fascinated by, but it's not that common in the ancient world. In older English, the Bible never calls us special. It's not in there. So anyway, contemporary English it is, but it's not normally. I did not like G&T on this one. Instead, your beauty should consist of your true inner self. That sounds very American, doesn't it? Just in terms of the whole New Age kind of religions in this world that we live in now. Several of those couldn't also figure out what to do with man, so they got rid of it. Lamza, adorn yourselves by the spiritual man within you. They added the word spiritual, trying to figure out what to do with man, I guess. With meek pride. I think we would probably prefer meekness, maybe, instead of meek pride, which is an oxymoron. Those two words don't fit together in English anymore. So that was an odd one. All right, verse 5. For thus, when even the holy women, wives, depending on how you want to translate gune, ones who were hoping in God, adorned themselves, they were being subordinated to their own husbands. So here we have the faithful women of the Old Testament, it's Peter's reference. You'll see again the active, passive thing we talked about before. So they submitted themselves, or they were submissive, down in the literal ones down below. So nothing new there. Amplified's new, being submissive to their own husbands and adapting themselves to them. I'm not going to claim husbands and wives probably shouldn't do some adapting to each other in marriage, but again, that's just not what's in the text, so it's adding something in. GW replaces hope with confidence. It was notable. MSB, Majority Standard, they put their hope in God. It's a different sentence structure than the Hebrew had, where it was just one verb. The Aramaic Bible said their souls, adorning your soul instead of yourself. A little different. All right, we're going to try and get through 6 and 7 here because that's when the male-female stuff stops and verse 8 shifts gears in the text. You probably even in your ESV have a subtitle before verse 8, before that shift. So verse 6, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose children you have become, doing good and not fearing any fear. A lot of translations will go with daughter here instead of children. Contextually accurate because we're talking about women, we're not talking about everybody. Children is the Greek word, though, that Peter made use of. He used the generic. NLT specifies the fear. The text does not specify the fear. What is the fear of? NLT claims the fears of the husband, right? When you do what is right without fear of what your husband might do. That's more than the Greek says. The Greek could mean that, but it doesn't have to. King James and a few of the other ones spelled Sarah differently than you're used to seeing it spelled in the English Bible, so I didn't change anything. I just pointed it out with that text. Legacy Standard ended the verse, not fearing any intimidation, in all caps. With NASB and LSB both, those 4 Bibles, Old Testament quotations are put in all capital letters. So they are suggesting to us that that little short phrase is from somewhere in the Old Testament. I did not seek it out as I was doing this yesterday. Amplified, not giving in to intimidation. GW, not letting anything make you afraid to do good. Catholic Public Domain, you are her daughters, well-behaved and unafraid. Well-behaved and doing good don't strike me as quite being the same thing, right? A child can be well-behaved without actually doing good for others. That's why that one struck me. Lambsas is just odd. They add Yahweh in, which isn't in the original text, but so long as you are not confused by any kind of false value, just weird words that aren't in the original language. All right, and then verse 7, and we'll skip ahead to the end so you can see. We'll do the rest of the chapter next week, but the husbands likewise, living with according to knowledge as a weak vessel to the feminine, so you can see it needs cleaning up, right? That doesn't work in English. Assigning honor as also fellow heirs of grace of life, into not hindering your prayers. A lot of verses will actually, there's a lot of similar struggles with this, but there's some commonality amongst the English translations. So what do I have in my notes on this one? Definitely a good example of where you have to smooth things over. All right, I only have one other note, so I'll come to that when we get to it. NLT, in the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. It's not the phrasing that Peter uses. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. She may be weaker than you are, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered. There's absolutely theology we can unpack in these verses, no doubt, but what's it mean that the wife is weaker? Right, that would be a theological conversation to have. Some of the texts will become more specific than this, right, and not leave it generic as the word itself is actually generic. Spiritually weaker, physically weaker, all kinds of different ways you could look at weakness and try to treat that. I didn't like NLT's use of equal partner. Word's not partner, it's inheritance, it's heir. Right? We receive together, husband and wife both receive the promises of God, male and female, right? If you want to go generic, men and women both inherit the promise of God. Partnership, sure, we can talk partnership, but that's not what the text is about. This is about salvation, and that gets lost when you go with equal partner instead of fellow heir, as Peter used. BSB, gracious gift of life. The word gift is not in the text, like it's just a doubling, right? Grace of life would be just fine. Most English Bibles have to add something in, living with your wife, your wives, living with them. You'll see that kind of language all through this verse. So, Berean annotated Bible, in the same way, treat your wives with consideration as a delicate vessel. Definitely a different word. I don't like the word delicate here because of what delicate actually means. I don't know that we usually probably do use the word delicate to be similar to weak, but the word delicate actually means self-indulgent, loving ease, easily hurt or sensitive. And again, that points this word in a very particular direction that Peter may not have been intending with the word. So that's why I did mark that one off. Contemporary English, again, trying to explain this, because she isn't as strong as you are. There's an illustration in the text. So when GW drops the word vessel, it doesn't help. The illustration is maybe you have, I don't know, it probably is the way we would use the word delicate, but maybe you have a valuable thing, a dish or some kind of ceramic thing that's very valuable and important and special to you, and because you know it's fragile, you're going to treat it differently than you treat your normal dishes, right? That's kind of the image that's behind this. How am I going to lift this up as important and not treat it as I would just treat everything else? Peter's teaching men to treat their wives that way. Your wife is of great value. Honor her, show her that honor, lift her up in this way, care for her in this way. So dropping the word vessel loses the illustration point. NAB said the weaker female sex, which is different than the Greek phrasing. NRSV did that too. All right, so that's a rundown here at the moment. Skip to the end. I haven't finished the chapter quite yet. I've got a few verses to go. I haven't done verses 20 to 22. But with a few verses left, there's your tops. BLB came in like second or third with the Old Testament, so they're right up there again with the New. And this is the one I told you, LSV, which was fourth to last on the Old Testament. It took until verse 8 before they made anything that I would consider even strange. Like they were acing this chapter for the most part. So I'd be curious to know more about who translated it and why they're so awful in the Old Testament and suddenly so good in Greek. They need to go back to Hebrew class, I guess. Their verbal translations were terrible in the Old. King James is fifth. I think it was fourth in the Old Testament. So next week at the end of this, I am going to put where they ranked in one versus where they ranked in the other, so it's easy and clear. But those are just a couple standing out to me as I remember. At the bottom of the pack, Contemporary English and G&T took the last two spots again. Nothing new for those. So, all right, we'll wrap up for this morning and come back and finish this next week. 2 weeks from now, Heights Point. The director of Heights Point is Janine Millardi, and her husband is Pastor Rocco Millardi. Pastor Millardi will be our preacher that morning, and then together they'll be with us here. She has a presentation for us on Heights Point. I don't know if it'll be both of them presenting or if it'll be just Janine. He was the executive director, but he stepped down from that role. She took it over, and he has become the chaplain of Heights Point, as well as serving a vacancy for one of the local congregations down that way. I think maybe Stockton is where he's serving the vacancy. So anyway, the Millardi family will be with us 2 weekends from now. And then Pastor Bierman's with us the week after that as he gets ready for that family discipleship conference.